Welcome to the Peerless YouTube. I am Caitie North, and today is the class 2 of our scale mini-series, and this one is going to be up close individual scales. And so we're using the reference photo, and it's this awesome, super vibrant blue viper snake, and it's awesome. It's so cool. And yeah, we're kind of working a little bit more every scale at a time, as opposed to like the first one that we did, where it's a kind of like the scales over the whole snake. So yeah, I hope you enjoy, and I can't wait to see your paintings. Let's get started. For your supplies, you'll be needing Peerless Watercolors, watercolor brush and paper, pencil, double-sided tape, scissors, white ink, a reference photo, and a light box. Alright, so a little explanation about how to get these individual scales. And you can see from where they go from like a cross kind of pattern to an actual scale. Like on this kind of completed one, I left the bottom of the snake a little bit more raw still. You can make these really awesome patterns and exactly where these scales are going to be with this simple method of making these kind of cross patterns. So if you have that, you know, what your shape is, and if you think of it as like a tornado or a vortex, and you kind of make these like really gentle kind of S shapes on one side, and then the directly opposite, you're going to cross them and still make these kind of gentle S shapes. You can create these kind of fishnet pattern, and those are actually the outline of your snake scales or mermaid scales, or you know, fish scales basically. So we're using a realistic reference photo, and it's pretty awesome when you break it down. In the reference photo, it is exactly the same pattern, and you can follow the scales of the entire reference photo, and they line up perfectly with this cross hatch kind of design. So when you're looking at this kind of outline that I've done, I have actually outlined it perfectly on my reference photo. But if you ever wanted to draw something like this on your own, now you know how to get those scales and start making your own snakes in their, you know, in their own shapes and patterns and movement and things. And usually all snakes have that kind of like smoother scale bottom and then a little bit more scales. The one thing that I do love the most about this viper is that the dragons on, like not the dragons, the scales on this dragon, oh my goodness, the scales on this snake kind of look really intense like dragon scales. And this is why I picked it, because they're so defined and you can see the shape in the reference photo perfectly. But as you can see here, if you're just gonna start as like that kind of cross-hatch fishnet design, then you'll be able to know where to place your snake scales. So now that we are ready with that little bit of backstory, if you want to do your own drawings, we are going to be making our paint palette and then transferring whatever snake you decided to draw to your watercolor paper. Alright, and the colors we are using today are sky blue, autumn's indigo, olive green, blood red, deep yellow, and then we are also using a white ink over top. So once you have your viper on your watercolor paper and your palette made, it is time to start painting. And this is our lightest wash. We are working light to dark and very simple, kind of doing a very soft layer or wash of the sky blue. And these are going to be the highlighted or light blue scales where the light source is hitting it. So you want to make sure that they are very, very light. So you can add a little bit of green, but mainly I just kind of focus on doing the blue for this first one. Okay, so on the bottom belly of the viper, you have more of a green. I mix it with a little bit of the sky blue, and the same exact thing. Make sure it is very light and very translucent. And this is just your first base color, and they are going to act as the highlighted areas of each scale. So you want to make sure that they are light enough that if you want it to be a light in the light source scale, then you have that tone in there, but it's not too dark that you would have to cover it up with like more white highlights than you want. The white highlights in this one actually acts as like an outline of the scale. We're not actually making them exactly where the light is shining, which I usually do. Usually my white highlights are kind of like where the light is actually hitting something. In this one, it kind of makes more of like an outline. So it'll explain later in the tutorial, but it's pretty cool once it gets going. So now that you've let that first wash and second wash of the light sky blue and the olive green dry, so the fun part of these scales is that we're going to try to do them all individually. So it's a little time consuming, but the end result and how each scale has their own varying like gradient between the greens and the blue and the indigo, it's very cool. So looking at your reference photo again, when you're working for individual scales, is kind of you see where the shadow of the scale in front of it is we're going to try to put a little bit more of the indigo, and then moving away from the shadow, it kind of gets more of the sky blue. And some of the scales are kind of look like they're pointed, or they have a high arch or, you know, rib almost in the very center of the scale. So you can see as I'm going, some of the scales, like half of it is a very dark indigo and the other side is a bright sky blue. And then some of the scales where they're a little bit bigger, it's kind of that transition between the indigo to a sky blue and more of a scale, I guess, yeah, like a light to dark scale. I guess that kind of makes sense. Like this one kind of has a light at the top and then darker to the bottom, but then it also has that little shadow from the scale next to it. So but yeah, kind of like watch and go as you know, pause if you need to get caught up. But yeah, they're really cool. And once they dry and kind of settle into the areas and the water has decided where the paint is going to pull and kind of in the different directions of on how wet you made each scale, they look really cool how they are individual scales, because that's ideally what they are, is you're trying to make it look like you can pick out each scale and know exactly where each of them are on the snake. So yeah, I will check back with you in a minute. So these ones where I'm talking that they kind of look like they have that ridge or spine in the middle of it, I noticed when I look at the reference photo that it has a really deep shadow on half of the, you know, the scale. I'm gonna like go through this whole video and see how many times I actually like say the word scale. It's gonna be probably like 10,000. But anyway, so using that I mean, if you guys haven't used the Autumn's Indigo too, like it is so like deep and rich, and a little bit goes a long way. And so when you want to get those very dark, amazing shadows, it's pretty simple. And so you can kind of like map out on the reference photo. I can link it here again. I'll put a little reference photo while I'm doing this part. But the ones that have those really intense ridge and that really deep shadow on the bottom, and then the top half of the scale has the highlighted areas, that's where I'm kind of like pulling all of those and starting to place the color in those ones. So So now that we kind of have our map of our main colors on the top of the head of the snake, we're going to work on the lower half. And these ones are a little bit harder to see just because they're in shadow and they're kind of like hides the definition. But if you kind of try to remember that fishnet design and that pattern and, you know, kind of follow along with the pencil marks that you did, that can kind of like help you keep them where they need to go, because we're actually going to come back through an outline in the next step and individually make those scales pop out a little bit now that they have their like dimension and color and tone. But yeah, so the bottom scales have a little bit more indigo and a little bit more green, and you don't have to worry as much about the individual placement like those top scales, because those are what makes that whole head look so cool. But yeah, really make a heavy line where that mouth opening is, and then just working individual scales, not as intense as the top, but you know, it is going to look pretty cool if you have individual colors in this section as well. Right, so for these lower scales, which is like the belly of the snake, I want you to kind of think of like, what is it like? Not a conveyor belt. What is, oh, I know, at the airport when they have where your luggage comes out and they have those metal things that slide, and you know, if they slide around the corner, they get wider and they at the corner, and then skinnier at the place where they're actually turning, if that makes sense. That's a good reference. And so to do the shadowing for that, that's kind of like how you want it. You want to show the step between these sliding plates, and it's the same exact thing that you're doing on the snake. So where the next one is, you want to have that dark indigo, and then you can kind of fan it out with a little bit of the green and a little bit of the blue, and kind of create those sliding plates. All right, and so once we're working on these individual scales for the body of the snake, they have a little bit more uniform kind of design to them, more than like the ones on the head. And so an easy way to do a larger area of scales, if they're all going to be relatively similar, is to do like a grouping. So like right now I'm doing all of those scales with the Autumn's Indigo, and then I'm going to go back through and add a drop of the blue, and then I'll probably put a little bit of the olive green and just use water to fan it out to like the translucent edge. And then wherever that little, you know, indigo was, that's that deepest, darkest shadow area with the like the scale where it's going like leading into the plate before it or the scale before it. So yeah, kind of an easier way to do a larger area of scales. And yeah, I hope that's a little helpful tip for like if you're doing like a larger painting too. It kind of saves a little bit of time. Okay, and so now we are on the lower body scales, and these ones are even more different and more weird and cool. And if you look at the reference photo, they have these crazy highlighted ridge on these ones. And so right now I'm trying to get a pattern that really shows that that ridge on the very top. And the way that I've done it is kind of like make a triangle and a triangle that complete that little diamond shape of the scale and leave that middle section white. And I will go back through with the white highlight as well, but sometimes I just want the highlight to be the light blue and not actually a white highlight. So I'm trying to keep it a little bit more on that painted side instead of just like relying on the white highlights. So but yeah, it starts, it's starting to look cool, but it's also kind of like a little bit more. I mean, you could tell that it's a snake, obviously. Like, it's a pretty, a softer, more kind of, like a softer watercolor. And then, like, when you get into these next layers is where you get the definition and detail and, like, the whole wow factor of, like, oh, wow, you can totally see every scale. Okay, so now that we've done most of our scales and the blue of the head is completely dry, we can add the yellow without fear of the blue mixing into it and making it green. And kind of when it's wet, you can add little dots of the blood red or whatever red you have, and it kind of gives that weird speckled kind of eye look, which the snake eye when it's up close is really cool. Maybe I'll do that next. We could do like a whole eye series of animal eyeballs, which are like super weird. Some animals have some like crazy eyeballs. That'd be fun. But yeah, and so now is the detailing. So if you can see your pencil marks, right now we are going to be using a very fine watercolor brush, and we are trying to be as detailed as possible in just using the Autumn's Indigo, and we are outlining pretty much exactly where all of our scales were that we did in pencil. And then we are going literally the entire thing. So again, a little tedious, and it's going to take a little bit of time, but in the end, it's worth it. So outline, 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 and outline some more. All right, so now that we have outlined our entire snake again with the Autumn's Indigo, I'm going to go back through and make sure I have all of the deeper shadowed areas, especially kind of where those funky looking nostrils are, and any shadows that kind of like really make the intense shadows on kind of that cheek area, or anything that kind of makes it pop. I'm going to make sure I add those now and kind of just make sure that they're, you know, you can also add a little bit more blues in certain areas that you want to pop to, but I kind of get a little bit of the detail things before we get going on the next step. And so once some of the areas of the Autumn's Indigo have dried and they're still not dark enough, especially for those the scales in the deeper shadow, you want something even darker than the indigo, you can use an artist pen and really define some of those scales. And if something is in a very dark, true black shadow, you can use that artist pen for those areas right now too. All right, so now we are going to be working on the branch or tree stump or whatever it is that this snake is on. It's not quite clear in the picture what it is, but it's definitely some sort of branch or stump or, you know, moss covered something, you know, whatever it is. I'm not going too detailed with this just for sake of time, since it's already kind of a little bit longer of a video. But basically, I'm throwing down a bunch of green, yellow. I use the black. The black starts to come in now. And then in the areas that I want it to look more like a branch and not just kind of moss, I'm using the blood red, which mixed with the other one, it kind of makes it brown. I kind of play with this a little bit. It's not my favorite part of the painting, but again, for the sake of making it a shorter tutorial, I just wanted to show something that the snake is on, so it's not just a floating snake, basically. But yeah, and also to kind of give it that reference that, you know, that it's on there. So however you guys want to do it, there's nothing, I'm not doing anything too crazy of technical, I guess. Yeah, just mostly when I'm wet, kind of just giving the colors to get the idea of greenery on the bottom half of the snake. And once you do that, you're going to add a little bit of a red to the snake tongue. And then once we're kind of done with that area and we're happy with it, and we've got, you know, some version of greenery, we're going to work on the background. So we're still going to be doing outlining, but I like doing the background first just to give like that pop of the snake. And I outlined a circle with a plate that I had. It's the same plate that I used for the first snake video, so they kind of look like they're part of a series, but you could definitely use a compass. That would work too. But yeah, you can see here I just drew my circle, and then I am using quite a bit of my black from my Peerless sheet, and I am making a very large puddle of a heavy amount, it's very saturated black. And so I'm going to ditch my water reservoir brush, which I always use, but in some cases I do use a regular watercolor brush to do the background. And so when you're using a watercolor brush and you're not dipping in water and you're only dipping it in this black puddle of paint, you're not gonna get the color gradient that you would get if you're like re-dipping it in water. And I really wanted the background to be a solid black without many different levels of you know, light to dark. So once you get your big puddle and you can start filling in your outline in the background of the snake. Right, so once I kind of fill it in and I love it, I think it looks cool, and then I make the, you know, last minute design idea to make the bottom green and do a really intense black shadows. I actually take these out. I don't know if I have a video of it, but what I do is dip my watercolor brush in water and then kind of pull up some of the paint and then take it off with my paper towel. So I decided that I wanted the bottom half to be brighter and more vibrant and to let the shadow behind the snake really what makes it pop. And I just decided that that area was, it was too dark. So I take it out, as you can see here. So I kind of, yeah, like I said, pulled it out with my paper towel, and now we kind of have that like lighter, which I actually think it's kind of cool. The black kind of gives it a cool effect and it makes a little bit more of an abstract look. I actually liked how it ended. But main thing here before you start the other part, since you're going to be resting your hand on the black area, is you want to make sure it's 100% dry before you start the white highlights. So now we are here. We are doing a white highlight, and this is the smallest pen, like the smallest paintbrush that I had, and I actually cut off half of the bristles with a, you know, regular scissors, nothing crazy, to make an even smaller paintbrush because I wanted these white highlights to be so ultra fine, and it's literally just to outline each scale. Not necessarily the entire scale, but the scale that is like the edge of it, that's where it's going to be the lightest or hitting the light source. Again, looking at your reference photo, I feel like this is what makes every individual scale pop. And when you see it by like that wow factor that I was talking about, where you can actually like see everything and it's like in its exact place, this is what does it. So between the outlining in the Autumn's Indigo and then the artist pen for the darker areas and now the white highlight, this is kind of like, I love this painting. I think it's so cool. I definitely will be doing either more scales like other things with scales, because now that I've done these scales, I really do feel like they look like dragon scales, so that might be in the future as well, but I think it's so cool. So we are getting pretty close to the end. Again, this is just another little tedious, lots of scales, lots of individual highlights. Again, you can look at your reference photo, you can follow along with me, but I feel like it is so cool, and I cannot wait. Please, 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 please share your paintings with us. If you tag Peerless on Instagram, like, it would be so cool to see all of them, because I love seeing the variations of all of the paintings. And yeah, I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and we do have one more in this series. It's going to be a little bit more of a pretty version, so I hope you enjoy that and you look for that next week. So thank you. And we made it to the end of the painting. That was a lot of scales and a lot of individual brush strokes. Not our usual for a lot of watercolor. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed it, and I can't wait to see your individual scale study paintings. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe and share with your friends, and we will see you next time.